happen? What if I take that risk and fail? Or, what if I look really bad? Or what if I fall flat on my butt and, people just make fun of me? Whatever that is, fear-based conversations, I always tell people they're an unwinnable game. Unwinnable. So if you are engaged in a fear-based conversation, be very clear. Whatever it is that you're up to, you are playing a game that is designed to not lead you to results that are going to make you win, period. So this is about understanding how to shift that. Fear is going to happen. That's part of our humanness. It's part of the world that we live in. So this is not about, we're never going to be afraid of doing something again. That's never going to happen. That's part of being human. I walked into the studio, with fear in the background. Oh my God, am I going to look bad? Oh my God, is the live stream going to be on time? It's Mark going to be all discombobulated and, I'm going to look bad. That's a conversation that I walk, no matter how much I prepare, I always walked into the studio with. Conversational intelligence allows me to understand and to really know that is what's going on, so that then I have access, I have a choice to shifting from a fear-based conversation to a trust-based conversation. Yes?
Yes.
Mr. Mark, you've been way too quiet. How are you today? You're dressed for success with your Bruins shirt. and he's not saying anything. For those of you, actually the live stream it's live finally, so you can see how sharp he actually looks with his Bruins, costume. But he's not talking today, but he did give me a sign in Spanish that it is time for the break.
Spanish, too.
In Spanish, mind you. So when we come back, we are going to be talking to Richard Glaser, President and CEO of Benchmark Communications and the Creating We Institute. And we are going to be chatting with him about conversational intelligence. So come right back. And welcome back to Get a Grip with Coach Elix. And I am so excited. I really am so excited to have Richard Glaser on the line with me. He's the president and CEO of Benchmark Communications and the Creating We Institute. He is also the husband of the legendary Judith Glaser, who is the founder and pioneer of conversational intelligence. So I could not be more proud and excited to engage in this conversation with Mr. Glaser. Richard, are you there?
I am here.
How are you?
I'm fine. How are you?
I am excellent. Thank you for taking the time to join us. By the way, I said this before. I don't know if you were listening before, but I said that today our show is definitely a global show because we have the entire European Conversational Intelligence Collective Group listening to our show today.
That's wonderful.
And you know they're listening because they love you and they love Judith. We all love Judith. So how are you doing? What are you up to?
Well, the Creating We Institute is becoming very active again. When Judith was ill, we spent a lot of time with WBEX in bringing conversational intelligence to many coaches around the world, and it was a fortuitous relationship because at the time it wasn't so easy for Judith to travel, and so we could do that, and it worked out very, very well. And Judith was really a consultant and what she called a corporate anthropologist, and so we've pretty much going back to our roots now and starting to reach out to past corporate clients and opening up those doors again.
Wow, that is fabulous. You know, one of my favorite quotes from Judith, and I'm going to quote: "The brain does not speak French or English; it speaks neuroscience." And understanding the neuroscience behind the conversation dynamics is the foundation of conversational intelligence. So, for our listeners, you know, many of whom perhaps today is the first time, Richard, that they hear the term conversational intelligence. Can you summarize what conversational intelligence is for those who may not be familiar with it?
Well, conversational intelligence really has turned out to be a way of life for many, many people. And it's based on two things. And I think what makes conversational intelligence very powerful is that it has a scientific base to it. And the base is both anthropological, because Judith was an anthropologist as well, and it's also based on neuroscience. And I think people have now started to become much more aware of how the chemicals in their body affect how they think about things, how they interact with each other, how they listen, how they have their conversations with each other. And it really goes back to two basic hormonal levels. One is cortisol and the other one is oxytocin. And Judith had done a lot of work with the late Bruce McEwen at Rockefeller, who really looked at stress and cortisol levels. And when people are under stress, their cortisol levels increase. And what that does is it takes away their thinking of their prefrontal cortex, which people call the executive brain or the orchestra leader of the brain. It's the newest, in an evolutionary sense, it's the newest part of the brain. And it throws things back into the limbic system, which sits in the back of your skull. And the limbic system is one of the older parts on an evolutionary sense of your brain. But I think many people are aware of the term amygdala hijack. Mm-hmm. And amygdala hijack is what people would go through when they're attacked, so forth and so on. But you can be attacked in many ways, not just physically. You can be attacked verbally. You can be attacked by being ignored. You can be attacked by being insulted, and so on. You get the same reaction. You get that cortisol level that rises up, and it makes you react in a way that you might not want to react, in a way you might not want to react in. And so what we've really tried to do, and what Judith tried to do in conversational intelligence is to make people aware of the chemicals that affect how their brain works, and try to increase the other major hormone, oxytocin, which is a bonding hormone. And so if you can be aware of what's going on, and you understand how you're going to, what's causing you to react, you can fight the cortisol level. Within yourself, you can say, I'm not going to respond that way. And by so doing, you start to build oxytocin in your system, which opens up you to different conversations and opens you up to creating trust with people that you want to work with. And I think the beauty, rather than just conversational being a technique, I think what makes conversational so powerful is that it has a scientific foundation to it. And it evolved through an understanding of the science. And Judith was one of the first people that really started to look at neuroscience and chemical changes in the brain and how that affected how people interact.
And I had said to the listeners before that, for me, a very simple way to have that level of awareness is if I know that there's fear in the background, I know that my amygdala, it's likely going to be hijacked, and that is generating cortisol in my system. So having that awareness allows me to begin the process of, okay, so how do I shift from that fear-based conversation, pun intended, to something else? And you talked about oxytocin, and for me, it's about shifting to trust. However I define that in that moment. Richard, one of the things that for many of us, whether you're a leader, whether you are at home, we are all having difficult conversations. That's part of life, and it doesn't matter. It could be work, it could be in our personal relationships. What would you say to somebody listening is a high-level practical tool or technique to overcome, that fear of those difficult conversations?
Well, I think the best thing to do is what Judith used to call double-clicking.
Oh.
And just double-click if somebody says something to you or you're in a beginning to get into a difficult conversation. Double-click. Say, well, could you expand on what you're talking about? Can you tell me a little bit more about how you've reached that conclusion? And so what you're really doing is as Judith would also say, you're asking questions that you don't have answers to, and that's like a level 3 conversation. And by so doing, you're beginning to understand where someone else is coming from, and you're beginning to diffuse what that, if there was animosity, or you're beginning to diffuse that interaction and make it a much more positive interaction. In other words, you're beginning to move into their space and say to them, well, tell me more. Tell me how you got to that. Why did you get to that? What was on your mind when you started to talk about that? And I think that's the most important thing to help us open up difficult conversations, whether it be with a child, a husband, a business associate, a leader within an organization, or if you're the leader working with somebody, and you can sense there's an issue. So if you're a leader, you say, well, how can I help you? Tell me what you need to accomplish what you wanted to accomplish. Is there something we can bring to the party to make that work for you? And so all of a sudden, that's the diffusing of that amygdala situation that's sitting there, that's creating, a rise in fear, or a rise in anger, or however you want to phrase it.
Yeah, and double clicking, by the way, for those of you who are listening, I always, when I learned the term, I always think of the image of sitting in front of your computer and having your mouse, and when you have to open a file, you have to double click, to
Right.
open that file. And if you want to open another file, you have to double click again. So what you're saying is that in conversations, double clicking is just asking for further information. And it doesn't have to be complicated. It can be as simple as, tell me more about that.
Right. You're absolutely right. And I think the other thing that Judith had the ability to do was she was a wordsmith. And she had the ability to take complex ideas and make them understandable. And so double clicking is one of those terms that she used. Asking questions you don't have answers for. Relationship before task. In other words, build a relationship with someone before you start to get into a task.
Absolutely incredible. Richard, you talked about level 3 conversation. How would you define that for listeners who, again, are just hearing about conversational intelligence for the first time? What is a level 3 conversation?
Okay, well, let me back up a little bit. Judith defined conversations in 3 different levels. There was 1, 2, and 3. Level 1 conversation is when I'm telling you something and you're telling me something. It's a discourse. We're going back and forth. We're sharing information. Level two conversations are where I start to become more of an advocate of what I believe, and that's not so bad because you need that as well. But if someone else is an advocate coming back to me, then what you really want to do is share those ideas back and forth again. The downside of a level 2 conversation is where you become a proselytizer of your belief. And so you say to somebody, this is the way to go, right? You understand me now, right? And what happens is, and I think the whole thing has shifted, what's happened is that many leaders felt that they had to have all the answers. And so leaders that worked in corporations or in nonprofit organizations, presidents of condo associations, it doesn't make any difference. They feel they have the power and they have the only answer. And what happens is that alienates everybody and increases an amygdala hijack and increases cortisol. And that's the downside of a level 2 conversation. You're either on the bus or you're off the bus. You're either with me or against me. And level 3 conversations is what we were just talking about, is like when you said to me, well, Richard, can you expand on a level 3 conversation? You're asking questions to open up a dialogue. And that becomes very, very important because that's what builds trust. Somebody believes that they're being listened to, and so they realize that they can talk about the ideas they have without any fear of being shot down or saying that's the dumbest idea I've ever heard. We've been there, done that. We've all had those relationships and those conversations. But by opening up a level 3 conversation and saying, "Tell me more. Let's work at this together." That's a great idea. How maybe we can add to that and how we can improve that. That's what really builds trust. And once you have trust, people are open to talk about ideas that they might not have wanted to talk about. Corporations for many years used to have problems, well, still do, with silos. Information is power within an organization. And if I withhold information from you, I have a power over you. And so any leader or any person who's running an organization or a team really wants to open up the dialogue among his team and not be someone who thinks they know everything. That style of management is gone. And I'll open up another issue with you. Judith's favorite quote was, to get to the next level of greatness depends on the quality of the culture, which depends on the quality of the relationships, which depends on the quality of the conversations. And everything happens through conversations. And I think it's very, very true. And one of the things that I've noticed in this I guess this era of virtual communication, like if you and I were sitting together and I'm looking at you and we're at a table, there's so many ways that people communicate that they can't, those communication styles don't go through on virtual. Because I see the way you sit, I see the way you move your eyes, I see the way you process information, I see the expressions on your face. All those nonverbal ways we communicate are important in communication. And so that's what makes up a culture within a company or an organization, that they operate in that way within the culture. And I think what's happened now is, one of the other things, people are now trying to fix the culture to fit in to this new virtual world. And I think it brings up another quote that Judith said, was when it comes to growing your business or working within your organization, navigating the future is a wiser strategy than working on fixing the past. We've all been trained to fix problems and success will follow. Well, this is not true in this new world. And so I think it's almost like a merger and acquisition scenario that companies have to change their culture. They can't fix the old culture to fit in what we're now going through. And from my standpoint, I think the COVID virus will be here for much longer than people think. I think this new mode of working will be here for a long time.
So Richard, hold on to that thought, because I'm being given the sign that we got to go into a break, but you're giving us plenty of golden nuggets, and we got to come back and keep talking to you. So hold on to the thought, and we'll be right back.
Okay.
And welcome back to Get a Grip with Coach Elix. I am Coach Elix, and I am talking to Richard Glaser, who is the president and CEO of Benchmark Communications and We Institute, and also the husband of the legendary Judith Glaser, who founded Conversational Intelligence. And we're talking about conversational intelligence. And Richard, you've made so many amazing, incredible, insightful points. I don't even know where to start, but I'm going to start with the last one. You talked about COVID, how the pandemic has really we are in unprecedented times, and it's really created a profound shift in how we operate our businesses. And you were talking a little bit about, how conversational intelligence can actually, be instrumental in help us navigate that. So let me ask you this: how could we-centric leadership help us navigate these changing times?
Well, I think we've seen a change in that over many years. When we first started Benchmark Communications as a company, everybody would benchmark against another company. So that at the time, if you wanted to learn how to run inventory, you would benchmark against LL Bean. If you wanted to know how to human resources and so on, you would benchmark against Albon Payne. They were the key companies, at least for those two areas. And the change that Judith saw, and the change that Judith started to do with her clients, was to say benchmark within. There's wisdom in the people that work with you. Open up their wisdom. Get to know them. And I'll give you an example, rather recent. That Judith worked with Angela Arnst when she went to Burberry to head up Burberry. And if you remember, Burberry was a very staid clothing company that had that plaid motif and sold raincoats.
Yep.
And over the last, Angela's no longer there, but over the last, you remember how Burberry exploded. All of a sudden it became a major fashion house. And the way they did that was Judith was consulting with Angela. And the way they did that was Angela said, we have a lot of young people that work here. They have a lot of great ideas, but they don't know how to make those ideas move forward. Let's get their ideas. She said, I have a whole floor of executives that know how to raise money, that know how to do this and know how to do this. Let's get the ideas and let's give them to the guys who know how to make it go forward. And so they used to have these big meetings with the millennials or the young hirees that were within the corporation, and they got all these great ideas. So one of the ideas is really what put Burberry on the map. They had a fashion show in Singapore, with a runway and all of that. And how many people can go to a fashion show? 250, 300 people. They filmed everything. They live filmed everything with iPads, with Apple phones, And that fashion show was seen, and that was an idea that came from these young people. Mm. That fashion show was seen by over 1 million people live, even though it was in Singapore. And what you saw on the runway was in the stores the next day. So if you saw something, you could go buy it. And that's what put Burberry on the map. And what it was listening to the intelligence within your own organizations. And I think that's the most important thing that organizations can do. And I think leadership within organizations has started to move in that direction. In the virtual world that we're in right now, it kind of gets shunted aside because you don't have that ability to build. It's more difficult to build trust. You can't walk into a meeting and shake hands with everybody 10 minutes early. You can't say, how are your kids doing? You can't say, oh, I heard your wife was sick. Is she better? Or I heard your husband had a skiing accident. How's it going? You can't do that in a virtual world. It becomes much more difficult. And then time becomes constricted. So that you have to remember and constantly concentrate on opening up and talking to people in a way that opens up trust. And that's a lot more difficult in a virtual world. So you really have to pay attention to it, whereas before it could have worked very easily for you.
Richard, that makes me think about where, as a country, we are having a critical conversation about racial justice, inequality, microaggressions in the workplace. Judith often talked about how we as humans are programmed to react to what's not like us. before we react to our similarities. You know, what would Judith tells us about how to overcome our differences and in order to connect and approach real equality?
Well, it goes back. It's very interesting. So part of Judith's education was she worked with Doreen Stegg at Drexel, and they were working with children. Judith's background in the beginning was early childhood development, which I always used to tease her. I said, that's why you get along with CEOs so well. But they had what they called a talking typewriter, and they took children, and the kids could come in and type stories if they wanted, or just hit the keys, and they would learn how to spell or whatever. And it was devised by GE, by the way, and the kids loved to hit ampersand, 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 ampersand. But what happened was they gained confidence playing with a machine that they didn't know. But one of the things that Judith, and it took her 6 months, was to how to observe without bias, how to watch something or watch somebody or interact with somebody without bias, without bringing your own biases in to the situation. Just be open. Just listen. Listen to connect. Find out what's going on. And I think what's happened, but what's happened in this world today is everyone is judgmental. Not everyone, but many people are judgmental. And that gets echoed on the internet and all these other forms of communication. And so nowadays, all you hear are opinions. Very rarely do you hear people listening to connect. You don't hear people listening without a bias. Look, as we go through all the racial issues that we now have, as we go through everything, the political issues that we have, it's so polarized because everybody has that bias. And so I think one of the first things we have to do is try to listen without bias. I think it helps.
Richard, how do and again, we have to go into a break, but I cannot not ask you this question. I hear what you're saying, and I also feel that we're all in a hijack mode. Like everyone is hijacked. So how is it possible to operate without bias, to listen, to connect when you're already in a hijack place? So hold on to the thought. We're going to take a break, and when we come back, I'd love to hear, your thoughts on that. We'll be right back. And welcome back to Get a Grip with Coach Elix. This is your host, Coach Elix, and I am having a conversation with Richard Glazer, president of Benchmark Communications, and the husband of the legendary Judith Glazer, who is the creator and founder of Conversational Intelligence. And during the last break, we talked about listening to connect and our biases. And I asked you, Richard, I feel that we are all operating in a state of hijack, where we're all in a fight, flee, protect, defense state. So how do we listen without bias?
Well, I mean, it's very, very interesting. Judith used to talk about being an experimenter with an OR at the end rather than an ER. And what does that really boil down to? It means that you have to try new ways. It means you have to experiment with new ways of communicating. And you can't have any fear of that. You have to be, and through that, you really become a mentor to whom you're communicating with. And so you have to just open up a little bit more. I think we're in a very, very difficult time. And I don't want to talk politics, but I think we could all demand more from our leaders. We could all demand more from what's happened is I think there's too much emphasis on celebrities. Everybody becomes an expert. People are distrustful of expertise. As a scientist, as I told you, I think I told you my expertise for many years was in the drug development, design of clinical trials, how to get pharmaceuticals to marketplace, and so on. And I just think that there's a distrust of people that have information to share, because so many people are experts in areas that they're not expert in. Everything becomes an opinion, rather than this is what we're seeing. And I think you have to really open up that discourse of, well, what are you really seeing that brings you to that? And if you're aware of the fact that we're all amygdala hijacked, that we're all living in this world of stress and cortisol levels, and we know that our brains are changing epigenetically, and so we have to really work at changing that type of cognitive discourse that we're having, and start to say, look, I can think about things even though I'm stressed. I can go back and let my prefrontal cortex open me up to think about things in another way. And we can start to battle that type of amygdala hijack. Look, the stress right now is unbelievable. We have this disease that's not going away. We have this disease that has killed so many people worldwide and in the United States. And yet we have people that feel that, I'm not going to get it. I'm going to be fine. I don't have to do this. I don't have to do that. And it's all based. I mean, it's all based on a belief that has no basis for anything. Mm. And so I think what we really need to do, and even people who believe differently than I do. I mean, I believe you should wear a mask, for example. But even people who believe differently than I do, really, if we could get people to sit back and start to think a little bit more about how they got to that belief system. What created that? How did they get there? And then have that type of discourse, and that's not easy to do.
It's not.
Even though conversational intelligence is a phenomenal, I'll call it a tool, is a phenomenal methodology that opens up that discourse.
Yes.
You have to get past that anger. And look, it's not easy to do. We had a series of lectures in South Africa, and somebody brought up the same question or a similar question. What do we do? How do we get people who have been disfranchised into the government? How do we bring people up to speed? How do we give them jobs over people who are more qualified? And yet they're not qualified not because of anything that they did. They're not qualified because of the environment they grew up in. And it's a very, very difficult situation. It's a very hard thing to get through, and it doesn't happen overnight. And I think, but I also think that corporations, large corporations, can play a role in changing those types of biases. Mm-hmm. I think they have to be more community-oriented as opposed to just selling product. And many corporations, from candies to foods to computers to phones and everything else, sell product pretty well these days. But I think they have to be open as well to work within their communities with their employees, rather than just say we make this change. And there are some companies, if you read all the business books and so on, there are, in business magazines, there are some companies that really are strong advocates of their employees working in the community. And that's, I think, that can be much more powerful, because a person who's an employee of a company is your neighbor, mm-hmm. and he's working in the community. Whether he's working whether he's working to disperse food to poor people, whether he's working as a big brother and a big sister, it makes no difference. But what you can see if corporations encourage their employees to work like that, that starts to change the neighborhood. That starts to change the environment. And that's really, I think, corporations have to step up a little bit more than they have. And I understand they owe allegiance to their shareholders and on and on and on. But I think you're finding that boards are becoming more aware of that. I think you're finding that CEOs and other leaders are becoming more aware of that. But I think a lot of it, if corporations want this society to continue to grow and want this economy to spring back, I think they have to change the neighborhoods they operate in, the cities they operated in, the states they operated in. And it's not based on government handouts or anything else. It's working with the people the people that work for you, and having them work in the neighborhoods and encouraging them to do that, encouraging them to take their time. And I think that can make a difference, but I don't think it's a fast fix.
And in essence, what you're talking about is, our ability collectively to learn how to engage in those level 3 conversations. So for anyone who who's curious to learn more about conversational intelligence, we're going to make sure that they know how to connect with you, and your business partners, so that. And I'm going to make sure that I share that with my listeners as well in my social media. Richard, because we're running out of time, I want to talk a little bit about this book, Changing Conversations for a Changing World, a book that was, dedicated in honor of Judith, and it's the work of 15 global authors, coaches, and consultants from all over the world who decided to share their personal experience with conversational intelligence and how it has shifted and transformed the conversations that they're having with the world. You wrote the foreword for the book. What anything you want to say about that?
Well, I think what's really interesting about all the chapters that are in the book is that everyone, we're all sentient human beings. Everybody takes what they want and works with it. And I think what comes out in that book is that conversational intelligence plays a role in how they work with their relatives, their families, their corporations, their clients, their associates, but how they also bring their own personalities into conversational intelligence as well. And I think the book is really powerful in that way, because it's not saying you got to do this, you got to do this, you got to do this, you got to do this. It says, look what I achieved doing this with conversational intelligence in my own way. We work with a woman who works in South America, who Judy knew for, I'm sorry, Judith's professional name, who Judy knew forever. And Sandy has always worked from creating we, because she knew Judy She knew Judith back when Creating We was first written. And that's the way she approaches all the work that she does with her client base. It's very interesting. She comes from the position of Creating We to get to conversational intelligence, where most of the people who were the authors of this book really became aware of Judith probably through conversational intelligence. So they work with conversational intelligence as the basis of their work, and understanding that moving from I to we becomes very important. But it's through the vision of conversational intelligence. But I think the variation of how people use conversational intelligence or Creating We, I think the variation and their own personalities within that is really important, because that's what makes something grow. And we always can learn more.
Yes.
And so when you read that book, you learn more.
Absolutely. Right? And by the way, I am so proud. Chapter 2 is the chapter that I wrote, and I'm proud of it because it was written in collaboration with Judith. I remember, I wrote that as a LinkedIn article, and I remember asking Judith, because I was in the middle of getting my certification in conversational intelligence, and I thought of conversational intelligence as a roadmap, and I wanted to integrate it into my own methodology. And but I didn't. I wanted to have fun with it, so I wrote it through the lens of The Wizard of Oz. And I remember Judith saying to me, "Elix, you have got to write a children's book." So that's still in the background for me. And by the way, we are having a book launch on October 12th Eastern Time. That's going to be hosted by two of my colleagues, Deborah Goldstein and Cheryl Benton. And I'm going to post information on the book launch on October 12th on my social media. Richard, we are running out of time, but for those listeners who would love to get a hold of you, who perhaps would be interested in Judith's book, Conversational Intelligence, How Great Leaders Build Trust and Get Extraordinary Results, how can they connect with you?
Okay, there's two ways. You can connect with us. Well, first of all, you can go to the website, creatingwe.com. You can connect with us through concierge@creatingwe.com. When I tell people my name, they always get it wrong, but concierge@creatingwe.com works. info@creatingwe.com works. And Amazon, Judith's books are still on the market. Conversational Intelligence is sold by Amazon. And so if people are interested in purchasing the book, they can go to Amazon and order it. And nowadays, I guess you get it in a day. So things work pretty quick.
And for me personally, I think it's a must-have for anyone, whether you're in leadership or whether you just want to be the leader of your own life. It's a must-get. Richard, thank you so much. You've given your time, your attention so generously, and I'm so appreciative. And I hope that you would say yes if I make another invite to come back onto the show.
It would be my pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Richard. And for everyone else, it's time that we say goodbye. I'm Coach Elix, and you can find me at Coach Elix on my social media. I have my co-host,
Stephen the Medium,
and Mark, our producer. We all say goodbye. Thank you, and we'll see you again next Wednesday for Stephen's show, Through the Static, at 5 p.m., followed by Mark's show. No, Mark's show first, then Stephen's show, and then next Friday, Get a Grip with Coach Elix. Have a great weekend, everyone.